Hey everyone, I'm Josh Loftus, and this is the Everyday Monday podcast, the podcast where we talk about everyday people doing everyday things in everyday churches. Whether you're a pastor, a plumber, or that person who likes blue cheese on their burger, if you do, you don't like cheeseburgers, you just like blue cheese. This podcast is for you. This is where we find value in the trenches of Christian life. Welcome to Everyday Monday. And with me in the trenches today, I have a very special guest. I've been really excited. I've been trying to get her on for a while, and we finally did it. She's a wife. She's a mom. She's one of the greatest conference MCs I have ever seen in my life. Here to bring some class to the podcast, Krista McDunn. Krista, thank you for joining us today.
Oh my goodness. I don't know if I can live up to that introduction.
Well, the nice thing is you already have. Everything I listed in there, you've already done. So from this point on, you can just retire, right?
I should.
Yeah. So, Krista, we met at the 2019 Doctrine and Devotion Conference there in Geneva, Illinois.
Right.
Fantastic conference, one of the best, if not the best conference I've ever gone to. And at the risk of flattery, I was super impressed of how you kept everything running smoothly and got people where they needed to go, tell them what they needed to do, which I'm sure just from listening to the Doctrine and Devotion podcast is not an easy feat with Joe and Jimmy, with all the bantering that goes on there. But it was awesome, great conference, and just wanted to start off just by asking you, what's the hardest part about hosting a Bible conference? Because I'm sure there are so many integral parts that weave in and out. What was the hardest part for you?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm so glad you enjoyed it. It was so much fun pulling it together. But yeah, it is a lot of work for sure. Probably the hardest part, oh gosh, I pull together the volunteers, and not that it's difficult recruiting volunteers, but just making sure we have enough people, because they're the ones that make it run.
Oh yeah.
I'm just one person. So but I know actually once the conference starts, I always say this, once the conference actually starts, my job's kind of done, because I know all the volunteers are going to just kind of take over and
Right.
handle everything. And so, yeah, I actually breathe a little easier once things
Yeah.
actually get going. So
Right.
it's
Right.
so I guess the hardest part is maybe those weeks leading up and just making sure we have all our ducks in a row, and everybody, we've got the airport runs, or whatever we need to do to get speakers and, that type of thing. So
Right.
that
Right.
behind the scenes stuff.
It's like a it's like a vacation Bible school for adults.
I never thought of it like that, but I
Right?
think you're right. That's
Kind
really
of is.
true.
Yeah,
Without
you
crafts.
yeah, without crafts, but there are like notebooks and like book tables, and you have snacks,
We had
right?
awesome
So
snacks, yeah.
you did. It was great. I loved it.
That's awesome.
Uh,
I'm gonna have to remember that for next year. Welcome to VBS for adults.
yeah, that's right. That's right. That's really what it is, and we all loved it. It was awesome. Well, Krista, before we get going in here, you get to be part of a special episode because we actually have our first sponsor
Awesome.
for the podcast, which is really, really cool. Our sponsor for this episode, and actually going to be the sponsor for the next couple episodes, is reftunes.com. For those of you who don't know Reftunes is a series by a very talented artist named Paul Cox, exploring church history through comics. And they did our Facebook wall. If you go onto our Facebook page, they did a really cool sketch for the podcast. It's me and Charles Spurgeon talking through a microphone. It's fantastic. Fantastic artist, really, really cool comics. You guys need to go check it out. They are on reftunes.com, obviously Facebook and Instagram and Twitter at reftunes. Go check them out. He does custom work. If you guys want some custom comics made, they've been a really cool blessing for me. He does a really neat scene from church history, puts a really cool quote on there. He's just a fantastic artist. You guys need to go check out reftunes.com. Thank you for sponsoring this podcast. And if any of you are interested in sponsoring a podcast to get your work and your name out there, if you know of anybody, shoot us an email at everydayamondaypodcast@gmail.com, or any of the socials. We're on there as well. So sponsor segment done. We are going to move on. So Krista, give us just a short bio of who you are, what you do, and just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, I've been married to my husband Kevin for 25 years. I can't believe it. We just
Good for you.
celebrated 25 years in May, and and then we also have a son, Ian, who's 16. He's going to be a junior this coming fall, which I also can't believe. My parents used to tell me how fast time goes when you have kids. They were not kidding.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
unbelievable how time flies. But yeah, so pretty much that has been what I've been doing, staying at home with my son, um, raising him. And then a few years ago, when he was in eighth grade, I realized things are really changing. He doesn't need me as much, not as much, but differently, a different
Sure.
kind of need. And I thought, okay, I can see on the horizon, college is 5 years away. I need to figure out what I'm going to do, so that
Hmm.
I'm not. It's going to be hard enough to go through that transition. I better have a plan. So I actually went back to school, and I'm pursuing my master's in clinical mental health counseling.
Wow.
So
Okay.
my undergrad was in psychology, and I just had kind of put that on hold. And so, yeah, so I went back to school, and I'm currently about two-thirds of the way completed. I'm in my last class right now, and then I will start my internship this fall. So
Okay.
graduating
Wow.
in May of 2020. So,
Wow. Crazy. Life is busy.
yeah, it is. It is.
Well, Krista, before we hop into our just kind of the main topics for the podcast, I just want to give you an opportunity and just kind of give us just a quick synopsis of how Christ found you, how you came to Christ, and what your personal testimony looks like. Go ahead and walk us through that.
Sure. I was so blessed to be raised by Christian parents. So
Yeah.
I came to know Christ at a young age, was converted at a young age. Um, so I grew up with that mindset and that influence. But it really wasn't until my mid 20s that I would say God really kind of broke me, to be
Mm,
honest. One thing that I've dealt with since I was a child is anxiety. And
mm,
it's kind of come and go in my life. There's been periods where I haven't experienced it as much. But in my mid 20s, it got pretty intense. And the funny thing was, it was all due to good things. My husband and I had just gotten married. We were building a house, and I started a new job, all of which are positive things. But it was a lot of change all at one time.
mm,
And it really just kind of took its toll on me, to the point that it even developed, I developed an eating disorder. Because when
mm.
I get nervous, I don't eat. Some people
Sure.
eat, or,
Hmm.
smoke, whatever. There's a lot of ways
I
we
I wish
cope.
I had that problem. Yeah.
I know. People say that.
I, I would have the body of Thor. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I took it to an extreme, and you don't want to do
Sure.
that though. And I ended
Right.
up in kind of a day hospital program, and um, through that process, though, God really opened my eyes. He really humbled me. Um,
Mm,
I thought I was an empathetic person prior to that, but I wasn't. And so I've really developed much more empathy for people and their situations. Yeah, so God really used that, to humble me, and spiritually really grew me during that time as well.
yeah. 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 That's great. That's great. Well, yeah, I didn't know we shared that connection. I grew up in a ministry that it's a residential counseling ministry that counsels girls and women suffering from drug and alcohol addictions, eating disorders, and things like
Wow,
that. And that's something that never ceases to amaze me is just honestly the bare bones power of the gospel and how that
agreed.
changes the mind, right? And how that will literally
Absolutely.
change who we are. And just hearing your testimony, how the gospel did that for you, and how God got a hold of you, it brings back all the memories of watching that happen, and that's so amazing seeing God's testimony in your life. That's so cool.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to it, to see. It's kind of, as we know, it's not over, right?
Right, right,
This whole
exactly. Yeah.
process, and the fact that, I know that's what encouraged me to pursue my master's, and I'm really excited to see. I'm not sure how God's going to use
Mhm.
me yet, but
Sure.
to see some of these principles that I'm learning combined with good theology, I
Right.
think could be really, but hopefully beneficial to a lot of people.
Yeah, yeah, well, and what's nice is that you have the benefit of hindsight, right? Is you
Yeah,
have the gospel, you know what they need, but you've also lived it, right? So they
exactly.
can look to you and see and you can say, "Look, I know what you're feeling. I know what you're thinking right now. This is how the gospel changed that, right? This is how Jesus changed me. Let me tell you," right? And
Right.
that's so cool that you now get to be in a position to be able to do that for other people. That's awesome.
I agree. And it makes, I don't know, I look back and it makes going through that worthwhile. If I can
Yeah.
even just help one person, then it was worth it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, for the sake of one, right?
Mhm.
That's a
Absolutely.
good motto we like to live by. Because yeah, and it's one of those weird things where it's like, we have this verse in scripture that we know all things work together for our good, right? Very often, we don't see that. It's like, I don't see how this situation is working out for my good, but you get to see it now. It's like, that was a horrible experience you went through, but how now God is going to use that, and that's just
Yeah,
such a testament to His grace and His sovereignty in our lives. It's so
I
cool.
agree.
Yeah.
I
So,
agree. Absolutely.
so Krista, tell us about where you go to church. Kind of a two-part question here: where you go to church, and then what is one aspect of your church that you really, really appreciate and value?
Well, I attend Redeemer Fellowship in St. Charles, Illinois.
Mhm.
And my husband and I have been attending there now for 5 years.
Okay.
And what attracted us to Redeemer, um, my husband heard Pastor Joe Thorne,
Mhm.
he was being interviewed actually on a different podcast. He was being interviewed on the White Horse Inn with Dr.
Oh
Michael
yeah,
Horton.
yeah,
And
yeah.
years before, we were involved in a church for 18 years. And he's like, wow, there's a guy in St. Charles who preaches the gospel, like gospel saturated stuff. Who knew, that was only 20 miles from where we lived.
Right.
So when through a series of events, we ended up leaving the church that we had been involved in. And so the second week after we left, my husband was like, "Come on, we got to drive down to St. Charles." And I was like, "Man," because we had lived 5 minutes away from church,
Right.
and I was
Right.
like, "I don't want to drive that far." And I knew we were probably going to love it, and we did.
Yeah. Yeah. Dang it.
Yeah, no, we did. We loved it, and at the time, our son was just finishing up grade school, and he came out of Sunday school and
Mm.
said, "I love this church. Can we go here all the time?" And we were like, okay, and
Yeah. Yeah.
we never went anywhere else. We just stayed. And I think the biggest thing, there are two things: the commitment to preaching the law and the gospel together,
Mm. Right.
but then also see the people at Redeemer. And when I say that, it's not just that they're super nice people, because there's a lot of nice people at a lot of churches. But what's unique, I think, to Redeemer is that dedication to preaching the gospel, but then also how that plays out in our relationships to each other. Um,
Okay.
of course, we want to keep each other accountable and things like that, but we extend each other grace and just a lot of room, and yeah, a lot of grace. It's the best way I can describe it. And so it's just a really unique group of believers, I think, because of that.
Walk us through as well. Obviously you're going there at Redeemer. Give us just kind of some of the primary ways that you serve at that church, and kind of the ways that you are plugged into the community there.
Sure. My husband and I, we host a community group in our home.
Mhm.
And so that's one way. I also volunteer in our Sunday school. I teach the 2 to 4 year olds once a month. And then
Oh,
I
you're brave.
they're so sweet. I think once you've had kids, it doesn't seem quite as at least for me, it
Sure.
doesn't. When I was younger, before I had kids, I was very intimidated to teach Sunday
Yeah.
school, but now I don't. No, I'm not so
Okay.
much. But,
There you go.
so that, and then I also do, I don't know what the official title is, but I do announcements at our church, but we kinda kick off the service with a call to worship and things like that, but we
Mhm.
don't have a title. I don't know what
Oh
that's
man,
called.
we we got to get a title.
I don't
Yeah.
know. We have to name ourselves. Ironically
Announcement extraordinaire. Yeah.
ironically, though, there's 3 of us named Krista in our church, which is very unusual. I've never run into people that shared
Okay.
my name. That's unusual, but all 3 of us do the announcements, which is really kinda strange.
Wow. It's the Krista gang.
It is.
Okay.
It's really
Right.
funny.
That's
So if your
funny.
name is Krista and you come to Redeemer, you might have to do announcements,
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
it's just gonna turn into a prerequisite
It
now.
might be.
Like, you can eat on your little connection cards, you need a box. "Name Krista?" Check this box.
Exactly.
The only avenue of service is announcements. I'm
Oh,
sorry, that's all
man.
you can do.
Exactly. Oh,
So when you think about both good and bad reasons for serving in church, good and bad motivations, right? So we're approaching getting plugged in, serving, giving of our time, our treasure, and our talents, right? And investing in the church. There are good and bad motivations for that, right? What do you think those are? Perhaps in your life or in your experiences, things that you've heard, things that you've seen. What do you think those good and bad motivations are?
yeah, that's a great question. Well, back at our previous church, when my husband and I first got married, we actually helped plant the church. So we were on the launch team. Um,
Okay,
that's a little bit of a different scenario because you don't have a lot of people. You have such a
sure.
small team of people that in those instances, you are often doing things that maybe are outside of your comfort zone, or
Sure.
you're not, like, I was on the worship team for a while and that I don't belong on the worship team at all. So I mean, I love to sing, I love worship, but and I can sort
Oh,
of.
I wish more people could be as self-aware as
Oh
you,
my gosh.
Krista.
Well, no, and I mean, I can sort of carry along the tune as long as I'm singing with someone else, but if they were like, "Take it away, Krista," it would be a disaster. So, that's not my calling. I wish it were. I would love
Oh,
that, but
love
it
it.
just isn't. I'm hoping in
Right.
heaven that I will have a really awesome voice, but right
Oh, we
now
all will. We
I
all will.
right
Yeah.
now I don't have it. So,
Yeah, that's okay. That's all right. It's better. Here's the thing. I can guarantee you, as someone who's been on many worship teams and enjoys it, and it's better knowing that and saying that yourself than having to be told that,
exactly. Right. Like
right? And that's
Like, I
okay.
don't like, I never understood, watching American Idol when it was like, "Aren't there
Yes.
people in these people's lives that love them enough to tell them this isn't for
Like, well,
you?"
everyone says I'm a good singer. It's like,
I
well,
know,
they're bad friends.
right? It's like, come on, love them enough to tell them the
Uh,
truth.
Amen.
But
Yes, please.
anyway, but yeah, so in that scenario, if you're launching, yes, you're going to be called to do some things that maybe you otherwise wouldn't necessarily step up and do. But one thing that I learned through that process is when you need to say, "Okay, I need to be done with this."
Mm,
I
yeah,
mentioned teaching Sunday school, and for some reason, back then I had kindergartners, but like basically kindergarten and first graders whom I love, and I love kids, but for some reason, back then it felt like having a term paper hanging over my head, having to do that. And somebody in our church said to me, "You know what? You need to let them know because you're actually taking the place of the person that God really intends to be leading that or doing that ministry."
sure.
And I never had thought about it like that. I was because he said, if the spot's filled, no, most people aren't going to elbow their way in. They're only going to volunteer when the vacancy is made known. And so he
Right.
said, you need to let them know that you should step out so the right person can be in it. And that was so freeing to me to hear
Yeah.
that. Like, wait, I can do that. Like he was
Right.
giving me
Right.
permission. And so I've always remembered that. So I think, you know, definitely try things that are maybe new or take you outside of your comfort zone. I would definitely encourage people to do that. But at the same time, I think serving, while it's yes, it can be work and it can be tiring at times, it still should be fun. You
Mhm.
know, I remember, again, this was I'm really dating myself, but back in the day when like drama skits were popular and a lot of seeker
The
sensitive churches.
all black
Oh
turtlenecks
my gosh, yes, guilty.
and Carmen.
Yes. So I stumbled my way into the drama ministry because I was a warm body, at the
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
But
sure.
but I remember one of them was a skit about serving, and they're like, "Well, if it doesn't hurt, it doesn't count." And I think sometimes we have that mentality, like we're somehow if we're somehow not suffering through the process of serving,
Yes.
that it's
Yes.
not really sanctified or something.
Yeah. We Americans have some sort of, like, yeah, some sort of suffering mentality that we just if it's not miserable, it's not good,
Right.
right?
It doesn't count enough. And so I reject
Right.
that. That's a bad reason to
That is a
serve.
bad
Like you're going to suffer through it. I don't recommend that because it's not going to
right.
last. It's not sustainable.
One of the things you said specifically too was realizing and actually having the humility to realize that you aren't the only one who can fill this position, right? That God doesn't need you. you
Right.
need you need God, right?
Exactly.
And realizing that there are other people around you that could possibly and especially in my life more like absolutely do it better and be and be a better fit for that. And it's releasing that I think is shows humility and that you actually do care. Because if the goal is the quality of the ministry, right? And we are truly caring for the church, caring for our brothers and sisters, we're going to want the best person in the job to do that, right? And if we're
Right.
just doing it out of compulsion and out of guilt and kind of begrudgingly like pulling ourselves out of bed each morning to do it, yeah, there's probably somebody there who is going to do it better and they're going to find joy in that. And that's going to enable you to move into a different area where God might be calling you, right? And it just takes that humility to realize that maybe I need to let this go, right?
Right. And on the flip side, that kind of reminds me of maybe another not so great reason to serve is if we're fulfilling our own ego, you know,
Yep, that's a big
and
one.
that can, yeah, that's easy to have happen. Like we think, I was joking about myself in terms of that shouldn't be on the worship team, but sometimes we do not, we have these blind spots where we think like, oh, wait, no, this really is my calling. And, we need to listen to those around us
Yeah.
um, who maybe they're seeing things we're not. Not that they're necessarily saying like, "Wow, you really stink at that. You need to get out of it."
Sure, sure,
But
sure.
because most of us aren't going to say that to each other, I hope.
Yeah,
But what if they're saying like, "I could really see you in this ministry." I
right.
think we should
Yeah.
consider that.
Oh,
Because maybe
totally.
they're seeing something that we don't.
Yeah.
And yeah, so just to be open minded, I guess about service in the church in general is probably a good practice.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I mean, and that's how the Lord uses those are the means that the Lord uses to shape us and to mold us and to make us conform us more into the image of Christ, right? And to
Hmm.
grow us in our services. He uses other people, he uses our pastors and our friends and our family to say, "Hey, have you thought about this? Maybe this might not be where God has gifted you." And
Right.
again, it really does and it's kind of a theme, but it really does come back to humility and realizing and humbling ourselves to realize that, yeah, I don't have the answers, right? And God uses all these people to help me, just as
Absolutely.
He uses us to help other people, right? Um, and it's those it really is those people that I really value,
Hmm.
that speak into my life, that really cause me to think, "Oh, yeah, maybe this is a blind spot for me," right? That the Lord is using these people to kinda shine some light on, right? Um, so for you, Krista, when you think about the Christians that are around you or Christians that you've read or listened to, whatever the case, Christians that encourage you and spur you on to following Christ more than you do now.
Hmm.
One, who are those Christians for you? And two, what are the traits that they possess that cause that desire in you to follow Christ harder and faster?
Gosh, some of the people I think that stand out the most to me, they think of themselves less. I won't say not at all because that's just not feasible. Obviously,
Sure.
it's healthy to take care of ourselves, but
Mhm.
they're not their they it seems to me that they're not their first thought or their
Mm,
first priority. They're thinking about other people and how they can meet a need. Now, I say that carefully because when I think about Christ
mhm,
and how selfless he was, to the point, of coming to die for us, like
mhm,
Philippians 2, right, talks about how even though he had the form of God, didn't think that equality with God was something to be grasped.
right.
That verse always floors me because I'm like, oh, I think it's to be grasped.
Oh, I know. Oh, yeah,
That's
yeah.
isn't. That's
I would be grasping that. Yeah.
yeah, that's to me, that's kind of the essence of all sin, right? Was we're competing with God for his job. But
Amen.
Christ
Amen.
was like, "Nope, I'm gonna humble myself and I'm gonna become like these lowly creatures and come
Yeah.
and save them." That's kind of what I see embodied in people that I wanna be more, I'm like, I want what they're having. I wanna be like that.
Hashtag goals, right? It's
Exactly.
it's it's those wonderful examples that are in front of us that cause us to want to love Christ more, and those are wonderful, wonderful, and could not go through this life without them for sure. Um, so, what is one of the most unforgettable or funniest church experiences you have ever had?
Oh gosh, I do have a few stories.
I'm sure you do. I want to hear them all.
What
Yeah.
well, one of my I'll just out myself. Although I
All right.
it's funny because they happened very publicly, so I might as well tell them on a podcast. But
Mine as well.
yeah, at our previous church, I also did announcements there, and it was a larger church, like
Mhm.
in terms of numbers and square footage.
Okay.
And I happened to be in the kind of in the lobby talking with someone, forgetting that I'd have to do announcements midway through the service. And
Yeah. Oh no.
someone came to the door and said, "Krista, you're on. It's time for the announcements." I went sprinting down like the side of the church and people are laughing. I'm like running full speed, run up onto the stage,
Uh,
but now I'm out of breath and I can't do the announcements. And so I'm like heaving, like trying, okay,
children's church
so
needs
tomorrow, yeah, it was
volunteers.
ridiculous. It was ridiculous. So that was pretty funny.
That's good stuff. I like that a lot.
But then another one, if you want more than one.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Give me one more.
Okay, another one is okay, now I'm at Redeemer
Mhm.
and they found out, wait, you did announcements at your previous church? Well, come on, we'll have you do them. And I was
Right.
always worried in the back of my mind that I was going to say, after 18 years of saying the other church's name, I was always
Oh,
worried, like, what if I say that name?
right.
And one Sunday, I said Redeemer, but I didn't say Redeemer Fellowship. I said Redeemer Community Church because our previous church was
Oh,
Community Church.
okay.
And as soon as it came out of my mouth, it was funny. Joe was sitting like right in front of me. And he looked up. And if you know Joe, Joe has this way of making this screwed up face when you like say something weird. And I got that screwed up face. And I was like, I literally said out loud, "Oh my gosh, I just renamed the church." It was so weird.
I
Thankfully,
have so much
oh my
power.
gosh, yeah, I'm like, "I'm really sorry." But luckily, everybody was laughing, and the thing about working with Joe and Jimmy in particular, not
Yeah.
only at Redeemer, but also on the conference, is that one thing they say all the time is we take the things of God very seriously, but we do not take ourselves seriously.
Right.
And
Right.
thankfully, it makes it very easy to serve at a church like that because
Yeah.
nobody's gonna come down on you for renaming the church
Right. Yeah,
from
exactly.
Sunday
So
morning.
so
They're
we're gonna have to yeah, you're gonna have to take a small break
exactly,
from announcements until you can get your thoughts together, and then we'll have a probationary period to have you come back.
exactly. Luckily, they thought it was funny too. So yeah,
Oh, that's awesome.
yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Oh man. Well, Krista, we are almost done with the podcast, but not yet. Now comes the Monday hot takes. And this is where I ask you a bunch of random questions and you give me the first thing that pops into your
Oh,
head. You ready for
I
these?
guess I'm a little nervous.
Yes. Yeah, it's the best part of the podcast. All right, here we go. All right, we're going to start with an easy one. Favorite band or slash musical artist?
Oh gosh, the first band that popped in my head was Boston. I don't know why. I like,
Yes.
yeah, I love classic rock and like
Yes.
I loved
Me
Boston. I
too.
still do.
Oh, Krista, I'm so glad you said that. Boston is one of the greatest bands of all time. That's fantastic. I love it. All right, Krista, we're gonna heat it up a little bit. What is one of the worst books you've ever read?
Dating with Integrity.
You- no hesitation.
Okay,
You had that primed and ready to go. All right. All right. If you could close one fast food chain, which one would you close?
for me it would be Taco Bell.
Taco Bell, getting rid of the 5-layer burrito.
Sorry,
Get out of here.
I'm just not a Taco Bell gal, but I love Mexican,
Yeah.
but just not Taco Bell.
Yeah, well, Taco Bell's not Mexican, so that's okay.
Well,
it's America's version of Mexican.
Yeah.
It's just bad.
Right.
All right, if you could disinvent one thing, what would it be?
Oh man, what does my son use that I wish he didn't? Maybe, I don't know. Video games.
There you go.
Maybe
We're pitching video games.
I don't know.
That's right. All right. What is one thing that you've tried that you will never ever try again?
Roller coasters. Just because
Really?
I loved them at a point in my life. I cannot go on them anymore. I don't know if it's having kids or what, but I just I can't, like, motion sickness is kind of a newer thing
it
for
just
me,
gets
and
you
I just
sick.
can't do them anymore, which I wish I could, but I just can't.
Yeah. Oh, okay. All right. That's too bad.
Yeah.
All right.
fun
All right,
for me.
Krista. In what situation or place would you find yourself most out of place in?
Well, one of them was my husband. By training, he's a mechanical engineer, and he's now in product development. But early in our marriage, when he worked for a company where he did engineering, and he has a number of patents, actually. And so they would have a patent award dinner every year, and I would attend that with him. And I felt very out of place there because I am not gifted in math or physics or inventing anything. And so I just...
Were you the mean girl in school that was like, look, what a bunch of nerds?
No, no, I was actually a very dedicated student. I was. That was fine, but I was just like, I don't know. I don't know this stuff. So I just felt like I felt dumb.
Well, if it makes you feel better, Krista, that's me in most situations. Okay? So we're doing okay. We're doing all right. What is one of the craziest or most out of character things you have ever done?
Oh gosh. Okay, this is just a dumb story. I don't know. There's probably other things, but when I was in college, I worked at Wendy's. And one day I went into work and they were like, we have high-level muckety mucks coming. We need you to dress as Wendy. And I was like, no. And they're like, no, you have to dress as Wendy. So I had the blue gingham dress and bloomers. I even had those crazy red and white striped socks. But I drew the line at wearing the red yarn wig. And they were like, you have to wear the wig. And I'm like, I am not wearing that wig. And they were like, but they're going to come. I said, well, tell them I'm allergic to the red dye in the yarn. I don't care what you tell them, but I'm not wearing it. Even the little kids that came laughed at me. It was not enjoyable.
Oh, that's awful. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I feel for you on that one.
It was. I think I might need counseling just for that.
Okay. Yeah. Well, you'll have to give Pat a call. Right?
I should.
Okay. Least favorite food?
Probably like seafood related.
Seafood.
Yeah,
okay.
never developed a taste for that.
All right. Well, being in the Midwest where you're at, that makes sense. They have to ship it quite a ways to get it to you.
That's true.
Yeah. Don't trust that. What's your favorite movie?
Oh gosh. I'm really sentimental and like old movies, so I'll just say It's a Wonderful Life. I'm kind of sappy like that.
All right.
I know.
Jimmy Stewart. Yep.
Sorry.
No, it's a good one. It's all right. It's all right. Nuts and cookies, yes or no?
I'm cool with it. I'm all right with it.
Oh boy. Okay. There has to be a disclaimer though. Like there has to be like an actual sign on the plate of cookies. There are nuts in
Yeah,
here.
no, I'm good with that too. Like I don't put nuts in cookies now because I think most people kind of don't prefer them. But growing up, definitely we had walnuts in our chocolate chip cookies and it was all right.
All right. What is your go-to karaoke song?
I don't think I have a go-to karaoke song.
Everyone has one.
All right.
This is from Boston.
I know Boston's impossible to sing. Their voices are so high. But yeah, probably like Foreplay Long Time if we're going with Boston. It's the classic, right?
Yes.
So
that and More Than a Feeling.
That too. Those two for sure would be.
Right on. All right. What's the worst part about being on a podcast?
Oh man. Just assuming the whole time I sound like an idiot. Or is he gonna have to edit this
Oh,
too?
no, 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 not at
I
all. It
hope
was
you can
great.
get enough for the podcast out of all of this.
We got
Oh,
plenty. You were awesome. It was fantastic. Well, Krista, that does wrap it up for us. We've come to the end of the podcast. I really appreciate you being on with me. Thank you so much for joining us today.
well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right, awesome, awesome. Well, hey everyone, you guys know the drill. You can head on over to iTunes and leave a raving review and a 5-star rating. Only raving reviews and 5-star ratings will be accepted. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Music, YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcasts. We are there. Head on over to facebook.com/Everyday Monday Podcast, Instagram at Everyday Monday Pod, and thank you all for joining us in the trenches today. And we will catch you on the next step of Everyday a Monday.